Welcome to Journey to the Sunny Side, the podcast where we have thoughtful conversations to explore the science of habits, uncover the secrets to mindful living, and of course, inspire your own mindful drinking journey. This podcast is brought to you by Sunnyside, the #1 alcohol moderation platform. And if you could benefit from drinking a bit less, head on over to sunnyside.co to get a free 15-day trial. I'm your host, Mike Hardenbrook, published author, neuroscience enthusiast, and habit change expert. Today we're joined with Charlie Engle, who shares his journey from struggling with alcohol to finding healing and sustained recovery through endurance challenges. Incredibly, Charlie ran 4,500 miles across the Sahara Desert, which later became a movie produced by Matt Damon. In this episode, we'll explore the importance of community and the potential of alternative treatments for mental health, such as psychedelic-assisted therapy. Charlie's story is a vivid illustration of how varied paths can lead to personal transformation, and you're going to want to listen to hear his craziest endurance adventure yet to date. Charlie, thanks for coming. You and I met at the Wonderland conference in Miami. I got to listen to you on stage, and it was just an inspirational story, so I'm really excited to have you here to share it with everybody. But before we get into all of that, I actually overheard a story about you with Sir Richard Branson. So let's lead it off with kind of what that was all about.
Yeah, no, thanks, Mike. I appreciate the question, and it's great to chat with you. Wonderland was certainly an interesting, eclectic, funky conference. I really enjoyed it, and one of the more kind of interesting talks on stage that I've given, just because of the nature of the psychedelic piece. So it was really quite interesting, though.
I got to
did
tell you
just
real
get
quick
back.
to cut you off, though,
Yeah.
that I did not plan on seeing your talk, and I just sat in because the stage was open and you walked on. And I have to tell you that it was the best talk of all of the talks that I
Thank you.
got to watch. And there were a lot of good ones.
There
So,
were.
yeah.
There were. Well, that means a lot to me, seriously, because it's, I enjoy speaking a lot, and I try to, it was an interesting venue because I had been there, from the day before, and I'd watched a few talks, and the stages were kind of big. There were a lot of chairs and not a lot of people, and people tended to sort of spread out. So as a speaker, it's weird to look out there and, you know, there might be 100 people, but there's 300 chairs. So it feels kind of empty and all of that. And I'm happy to say that I've been around long enough and I've been doing it long enough to just, I remember when my book came out a few years ago, Running Man, and people would, I got booked at Barnes and Noble quite a bit and that kind of thing. And I mean, you never knew. Sometimes I would show up and there'd be 100 people, and other times there would be 5. and I would really have to just like remind myself that those 5 people are here and they want to hear what I have to say. And that's, my responsibility is to just do the best I can with the people who are there. And but I so appreciate the fact that you just happened to choose my talk, and I'm happy to say I had a few other people come up and chat with me. I think some of why people come up and talk too, in many cases, is because I talk openly about addiction and recovery, and like it's a thing that affects every family. Whether it's the person themselves or a close friend or family member, or rarely anybody that doesn't have some exposure to the craziness and chaos that is, being around a person struggling with addiction. And so I think it's I try to give it a spin too, where people recognize that there's a lot of new technology. There's a lot of hope in psychedelic therapies. There's a lot of things that are happening now that honestly, the Charlie Engle of even 5 years ago would have probably, discounted or not taken seriously. And so I think my evolution in that space and my recognition that, abstinence isn't going to work for everybody, or AA is not going to work for everybody specifically, and that there's 100 different paths to sobriety, whatever that might mean for someone. And way more important to save someone's life than to get caught up in the semantics of how they're doing it. So, but as for this last week, I'm happy to say I just returned. I'm a little foggy right now, but I just returned from South Africa, and a week with Richard Branson, and my very weird life and lifestyle has led me to some amazing invitations where I've gotten to go do some truly meaningful things, meaningful to me and hopefully to others and the planet and humanity in general. Not to be too like uh, overblown about this, but this was a trip that came about. I've been to Necker Island, which is his island in the Virgin Islands, a couple of times, and as I like to say, I guess I was a good enough guest that when things open up a certain way, I got a chance to go to South Africa, and it was beautiful. It was 3 days in Johannesburg, and we visited Nelson Mandela's presidential home, his childhood home, prison, not Robben Island, but the prison where he was kept in Johannesburg for years, and there were, these trips are very heavily focused on philanthropy and on, um, some sort of good to be done. And, so most every visit we had to a place, there was an opportunity to either give or spread the word or at least offer support of some kind for an amazing nonprofit that was trying to do good. So then after that, we got to go. This is a small group of about 10 of us, and we got to go out to Richard Branson's private game reserve called Ulusaba, which is sort of east of Johannesburg, but in South Africa. And, I've mostly because of my wife. My wife is a very well known wildlife biologist and technically an ornithologist, a bird scientist. So I've gotten to go to some really cool places with her while she's doing her job at a lot of places in Africa and South America. She didn't get to go on this trip, which is very disappointing, but it was, even for all the places I've been, I've never seen any place like this. They have a professional staff that really knows the animals, the way to take care of them. It's not like going to a zoo, or it didn't feel like that crazy, chaotic. I don't know if you've ever been like on a whale watching trip. I get stressed out on those because there's a whale and 18 boats are like converging on this one pod of whales, and it all feels very stressful. Like I don't actually like that. I get it, but I don't like it. This was more casual and laid back, and Sir Richard was around most of the time, and it's kind of his, I've been around him enough that it's kind of his happy place in a way. So he's, man, he's shirt off, uh enjoying nature, having casual conversations, telling stories about his own adventures. And it's a great place to start our chat, because the one thing that Richard Branson has that I talk about a lot, that I think I have to a degree, and most of the people I hang out with have, is one simple thing, and that's curiosity. Like no matter what, he's in his mid 70s now, he is still immensely curious about nature, about human behavior. He's the least curious about business. And he is well known for dividing his life into 1/3 family, 1/3 business, and 1/3, let's just call it philanthropy, and all the projects that he's got. And he really does an amazing job of being present in that kind of situation, around people who are like, I mean, every time I'm around him, I feel I'm not really a stargazer particularly, and I've had my share of encounters with famous people, but he's a special guy, and it was a really great experience, and I hope they invite me back.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, it's really cool that you just came off of that to this conversation, because not only is that a really neat insight, but also it's a fast forward version of where you were many years ago, or, you know, you could tell me how many years, but I think it segues into hearing your story. Normally, I wouldn't start a podcast and just say, tell me your story, but you have just such a good story that I'm not drawn in by stories as much as I was when I heard yours. And so I think, maybe starting at where your struggles were and where it culminated to this point of change and transformation, and then talk a little bit about, like, where that went, when things started to change. So I'll just like pass the mic to you, really
Yeah.
honestly, because I think it's a really great story.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. And yeah, it was very gratifying also on this trip because Richard Branson actually listened to my book recently, and which was an honor that he took the time to do that. So I got, it was great to answer questions from Richard Branson about my story. It was
That's
it was
amazing.
it was
Yeah,
very
and
weird.
I can relate to that feeling, because I actually gave you my book, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't know how you would receive it, just
Yeah.
because there's a lot of philosophies and theory around, specific programs, and you're such an open person. I gave it to you, and you were so
Oh,
kind, and I mean, you gave me a hug. I thought I was just blown back, so I know that feeling.
thank you for that. Well, I mean, look, man, you're clearly a very kind, thoughtful person, and there was I live my life on magnetism. You know what I mean? I think one thing age has helped me with a lot is the recognition that not everybody's gonna like me, and I'm not gonna necessarily be drawn to everyone I meet, but the right people tend to pop up at the right times, and I try to pay attention to that. And your kindness and willingness to kind of be vulnerable and share your book with me was beautiful. And I mean, I think it's the way we should, it's the way we should all be. It was clearly an act of kindness, and I was very grateful. And my story is I, I I think you said it well, and I'm comfortable in saying to anybody listening, to this, that I consider it my responsibility to be publicly vulnerable. So I think that that's a thing that's so often missing when you see either social media or people, writing their stories or whatever it might be, is we're so insecure about not always looking good, or like we're on a path to always knowing what the right answer is. And I'm 61 years old, and I have plenty of days where I don't feel like I have any answers. I wonder what happened, and then and I do recognize most of the time that that's probably I'm tired, or you know whatever might be going on, and I need to give myself some grace and get a good night's sleep, and wake up the next day and probably have a different perspective. But for many years in my early life, I struggled with addiction, and that came from, to be really blunt, the path to that. My view of the path to addiction is really changing even in this moment. I assumed, because I was a fourth generation addict, I grew up around this stuff, environment, genetics, like I just, and this sort of mantra in AA, and by no means am I giving AA a hard time when I say this, but like the disease pathology of addiction is often accepted as absolute and true. And again, I'm not actually saying that addiction is not a disease, but I do also really believe that there's so much intense negative language around what we are, and labeling ourselves as a particular thing, that it becomes partially a self-fulfilling prophecy. I spent so many years calling myself an addict, and saying things like, I'm still an addict, I'm just not using. And that's not true today. And it took a man named Gabor Mate to really bring my attention to that. And for anyone listening to this, if you don't know who he is, than you need to, because
He's
he is,
incredible.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
got a chance. He's another relationship. I got to meet him a couple times in person, and we became friends, and we had some amazing
Wow.
conversations. And I began to understand the nature of my own trauma from an early age, and how that actually set the stage for me to become somebody that struggled with alcohol and drugs. And so, um, and again, the reason it changes my own personal dialogue and what I say to myself is that I've come to recognize that I can heal those traumas in ways that I never thought was possible. We can discuss that maybe a little later, but but if you can't recognize it and sort of give yourself an open mind to think about the origins of behaviors and things that are, then you're never going to find any answers. You might get better. You probably, I mean, again, a lot of people get better, and I found for me, AA and abstinence and all of that got me better for a very long time. And then I sort of hit a point, even with all my running and the things I was doing, where I just wasn't I wasn't necessarily getting worse, but back to Richard Branson and curiosity, I want to keep making steps forward and learning more and not be settled in one place. And I think the age of, I'm going to get to the story in a second, but I think the skewing of addiction, especially in the United States, and the overdose deaths that are taking place every day, primarily in 30 and under age group, um, is indicative of the fact that people are dying quickly because they're not really even becoming addicts. They're accidentally, ingesting fentanyl, or maybe it's on purpose sometimes, but a lot of these overdoses and all these things are happening because of the illicit drug trade, especially around fentanyl and trank and some of these other just deadly, deadly drugs, that I didn't have to deal with, 30 years ago when I was an addict. So, and at that time for me, so in high school, I was that guy who overachieved in everything, and a lot of that was because I was desperate for my father's love. I mean, some of it's kind of cliche, but it's the truth. I had a very difficult, hard relationship with my father. I was an only child, and my parents were divorced super early, and I moved in with him as a teenager. And, he just wasn't the kind of guy to come to games or to tell me I did a good job. And, I was student body president, captain of, 5 teams, top 10 in my class, the first white student body president in a majority black high school in North Carolina. I mean, I accomplished some cool things, and things that I was proud of, but I never heard that from him. And I go to UNC Chapel Hill, and I think that I'm going to be this badass, amazing superstar on a college campus too. And of course, it took me like 3 days to figure out that I was unbelievably average, and that like every other freshman on that campus had basically some version of the same resume I had. And and I got lost in alcohol and cocaine. It was the 80s, which is I always referred to as the cocaine decade, and it's still prevalent today, but not. I mean, that was really the Miami Vice. That was the time. And and I basically spent 10 years, fighting this battle of, again, kind of overachieving in my normal life. I flunked out of college, which doesn't sound like overachieving, but I then went on to get, I would sell fitness memberships, or I'd sell cars, or whatever it was I was selling. I would literally be the best in the country at it. Um, and eventually I would celebrate my success, and shit can the whole thing, because one celebration for me would lead to months of going down this deep abyss, and I'd move somewhere else and start over again. And and I found my way into sobriety, partly because my first son was born. I got during that time I got married, I bought a house, I did all the things that I thought, you know, surely I couldn't be an addict if I was doing these things. And that's not the case, of course. But When my first son was born, and then when he was born, I thought that just in and of itself would cause me to quit. That surely if I was a decent person and wanted to be a good father, that I could just cut it off and be done with it. So clearly I still didn't know what the hell I was talking about, and because it doesn't work that way. And a couple months into his life, I found myself in the same pit of hell. And I recognized in that moment that, I really did have a choice to make between like living and dying. Like it was that serious. And I chose running, or as I like to say, for a lot of people, that probably is the same as dying. But I had been a runner in high school, and even during my 10 years of addiction, I'd go through phases where I cleaned up and I'd use running as a tool to sort of get healthy again. So I knew what it felt like to run. And, I committed to going to an AA meeting every day and going for a run every single day, and just seeing where that would lead me in my life. And I ended up doing those two things for 3 straight years, without missing a day. I went to a meeting and I went for a run every day. And I ran, over 30 marathons in that time period. And the joke I always tell is, of course, obviously I had that whole addiction thing under control. Because I just, I needed to feed this thing. But I was in this early phase of being really excited about running and traveling around the country, and even to other countries to run marathons. And I think what I figured out in my 20s, or my 30s really, after I got sober, was that community was the answer. And I'm certainly not the first person to come up with that, but for me, I had a sober community and I had a running community, and there were a lot of sober runners also. And I just found really deep power in that fellowship, and being able to share these experiences with people. And I mean, I truly believe that that's what kept me sober. And just staying sober, during those early years was the most important thing, and not getting caught up in, was I progressing better than somebody else, or did I have, I don't know, whatever it might be. And I really just, man, I flourished. Life got so much better. I'll go through this quickly, and then you can backtrack and ask me questions. But you know, life got much better. I became the senior producer for a TV show called Extreme Makeover Home Edition. And for a while, I became, I mean, it's a difficult thing to quantify, but I became, in some people's view, the top ultra distance runner in the world for a little while. And I mean, look, that's a that's a very subjective thing, because there's trail, there's road, there's mountains, there's every terrain, and like, there's going to be different opinions. But anyway, I managed to do well in some really big races for a while. Then I ended up getting this crazy idea to run across the Sahara Desert, and partnered with Matt Damon and made a really interesting, beautiful film about running across the Sahara. And uh, then I ended up going to prison, which was certainly an unplanned, as I like to call, federal holiday. And that's another, it's another complicated story. All this stuff is in my book and it's on my website. But, in short, a very unfair thing happened to me. And it really, as I like to say now, it destroyed the life that I had. It didn't destroy my life, because that there's only one person that can do that, and that's me. I mean, nobody else can actually own the, my feelings and my happiness. And this was the biggest test I had ever had of that, though, because it was humiliating and embarrassing, and there was a lot to it, which, again, I'm happy to talk about it or not. It doesn't matter, but I don't shy away from it, because I think for listeners, the thing that I can say more than anything, and I truly believe this, is if you don't own your narrative, somebody else will. If you don't have some haters, then you're not trying hard enough. Like if there's not some people out there that are
Yeah.
going to kind of zero in on you, then you're probably really playing it safe. And for me, that's just, I'm not interested in that. So I'd rather speak my mind and hopefully do it with kindness and self-reflection, that recognizes my own shortcomings, but also doesn't mean I have to like fall on my sword every other day. And I mean, we're all just human, and I think most are just doing the best they can, and we do get caught up in. Well, here's the other thing I tell groups all the time, especially young groups. I'm like, nobody gives a shit about your stuff. I mean, actually, nobody even like they care for about a minute. And, we think, of course, when we screw up or when something happens, like everybody's looking at us and talking about us, and they're not. They're not. Like for 5 seconds, maybe they are. But beyond that, they go back to being self-centered and self-focused, because that's the way we're all built. And so again, my hope is that when I tell stories, there's enough vulnerability in the stories to encourage other people to recognize that if they talk about their hardships, especially with their kids. Like I grew up in a house where my dad never told me anything about his early life, and only much later did I find out that he struggled. He got kicked off the basketball team when he was young for drinking. He got like all these lessons that when I was struggling, if he was a different guy, he could have come to me and said, "Hey, you know, I know you're struggling. I know things are bad, but here's what happened to me. And, you'll get through this." Like I didn't have that role model. And I want to be that for other people, and just to remind them that the vast majority of even the worst things that happen to us, even our self-inflicted wounds, aren't really all that important. They feel like they
Hmm.
are.
Yeah.
But those moments, those terrible moments, will typically pass by, if we just allow them to. And so now, look, I still run, I still, I bike, I have big goals, things that I still want to accomplish in the adventure world. More than anything right now, I want to accomplish things in my personal growth world, and I want to help other people find their path to personal growth through coaching and through experiences. And I think that people are very open to exploration these days, maybe more than ever, or at least a subset are. I think I saw this stat. I'm gonna let you ask me questions. I saw this stat a day or two ago that just kind of blew my mind. Actually, someone told me, but I did look it up and verify. But like 75% of Americans don't have a passport, and that
Hmm.
statistic really hit me like hard, because generally speaking, people have such strong opinions, and I don't want to pick on one side or the other, but generally speaking, people have very strong opinions about other countries, other people, other lifestyles, other things. And the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of them have never seen it in person, whatever that lifestyle might be. They've never been to that country. They don't know anything about the people. They're simply parroting other people that are in their tribe, about, about the way the world is. And I have to remind myself constantly that my way through this lifetime is to see as many people and places as I can before I'm done. And pretty much every single time I'm blown away by the kindness and generosity and hope and vulnerability of the people that I encounter. And any preconceived notions, I try not to have those, but some are just human nature. You can't help it. Even going to South Africa, I expected certain things, certain, people, even if they're kind to me. I thought, well, I wonder if, it's a majority black country, and obviously most people know the history of South Africa, and it's a very difficult and recent history. Man, people could not have been nicer to me. I mean, everybody, black, white, whatever, Indian. And it was just, again, that reminder of, we're all just trying to, do our best and muddle through this thing and learn as much as we can and hopefully not make the same mistakes. So, all right, I'll end it there for the time being and let you dive in, Mike.
No, not at all. I could sit here and listen to you go off on whatever, subject you want to
Thank you.
talk about. But I think I couldn't be more in line with you as far as the travel goes, because if you have the opportunity to go, it's the world is your classroom, and I really try to instill that in my kids as well. You go see museums, you talk to people, you stay in places long enough that you know how that they live, and you just don't go to a hotel, and maybe the hotel, beach, and restaurant. You get out and you talk to people and see how other people live. I'd love to get into all the adventure stuff that you've done, which is really cool, but I actually think that we should have a conversation because it's even more interesting because you have a specialized kind of experience around your relationship with alcohol, or previous relationship with alcohol, and it seems like you have an evolving view of that these days. And for me, AA works for a lot of people. I didn't feel like it was for me, and I know that a lot of people probably that should be in AA will say something like that, but it didn't really speak to me. The label part, I didn't really see myself as an alcoholic, neither did my wife, but I did have this problem. It was problematic, I'd say. It was wine in the evenings. I was like you. I wake up in the morning, I go for a run, even if I was hungover. It didn't matter, and I'd be highly productive all day. But I just had this, after grad school, had this habit that just built and built, and I didn't really understand a clear path to stopping it. I would stop for 30 days, and then I'd kind of be back where I was again, and so I kind of felt like at this place where, well, what do I do? Do I reduce? Do I quit forever? And I think that that's a difficult thing, and it's a hard ask for people. It's an all or nothing, right? If you want to change your habits with alcohol, or make a drastic change, you just got to stop, and it's going to be forever. So there's this more recent and modern view that people are taking around mindful drinking, which is really being mindful about how much and how often you're drinking alcohol. It also mindful drinking could actually be like you're reducing. It could be you're taking a break, an extended break. It could be, hey, I just intend to stop, and I'm going to be mindful about how that path looks. What is causing your view, I would say, to evolve a little bit around, where you started, what you went through, and how you see it now?
Yeah, no, it's complex, but it's also simple, the way many things are. Like there's, the question that I ask all the time of anyone, because very often people will approach me after a talk, or maybe they'll write an email and they'll say, I'm concerned that I'm an alcoholic and I'm trying to figure out if I am or not. And I typically will write back, or if we're in person, I'll just say that I don't actually think that that's the right question, because I don't think it's particularly relevant to necessarily make that decision as much as it is to ask yourself, how is this behavior serving me? That is to me a much more clarifying question. How are these 2 drinks every night serving me, or these 10 drinks every night serving me? Or maybe I don't drink during the week, but I drink, 10 drinks on Saturday night or whatever. So if you average it out over a week, it's only a drink and a half a day. Like there's all kinds of rationalizations, justifications. And the fact of the matter is, it's up to that individual person to ask the question, how is this behavior serving me? And I do think the other thing that, man, it seems like every day I see another study, whether it's Huberman or Peter Attia, or one of these docs out there who are very well known in the medical space, essentially just talking about the effects of alcohol, even 1 or 2 drinks a day, and how much it actually affects your body and your mind negatively. So now, saying all of that is irrelevant to the person whose body is now accustomed to drinking, a 6-pack a day, or, a pint of booze or more, every day. And there becomes that physiological need for it. That to me is true, genuine alcoholism. For me, as an alcoholic, it rarely manifested in big problems. I mean, it would have eventually, but for me, and I feel lucky, I called it the cocaine decade, and I really liked cocaine. And the amount of cocaine, I tell a lot of jokes that are, some people, every once in a while, somebody will get offended, and I'm like, look, man, the subject matter is already serious enough, and you just can't stay in that serious place all the time about this stuff. So I used to say that I would go to AA meetings primarily because I wanted to learn how to control my drinking, because it was really screwing up my drug use. And the drugs I was doing are very expensive, and I got tired of wasting drugs, because of my drinking. And look, so that's just a lighthearted comment on a serious subject, but okay. AA for me early on, it offered a community foundation, and the 12 steps are great, and you could apply the 12 step, um, theoretically to anything in your life, right? Whether it was smoking or, porn or gambling or anything like, and there are programs, 12-step programs for all of those things. But like the 12 steps as a concept is great, I think. The dogma that is attached to AA these days it became something that I just struggled with. And I found that I don't want to say I grew beyond it, because that seems unappreciative. AA served a purpose for me for the right amount of time, whatever that was. And I still, like I was just saying to my wife, that I'm speaking in a virtual AA meeting on New Year's Eve, a big one. And it's not like I've stopped being a participant in AA, but I have expanded my horizons. And what I really focus on is community. I want to be part of things that people will notice if I'm not there anymore. And maybe someone will call and check on me and say, hey, what's going on? Or, how are you? Or things okay? Or whatever. Because I think that is the strength, in the program, is being able to talk to people. Before COVID, I also would have told you, no freaking way that virtual meetings would ever be all that important. And now, of course, I can admit when I'm wrong. I was certainly wrong about that one. I love, like, this meeting I'm going to do on New Year's Eve. I mean, there will probably be people from, I don't know how many countries, on this call. And that is a cool thing. Do I prefer being in person with people? I mean, yes, that's a cool thing. Giving people hugs, like, all of that human contact is great. But the reach that the virtual world, of course, offers us is huge, and I think a lot of people can heal with that. So I would also say that my eyes have been opened to. You and I were at a psychedelic, Wonderland is a psychedelic conference, and it was primarily focused on psychedelic. Legislature, there was a lot of legal stuff going on. There was a lot of, but then there was also as I jokingly say, the more woo-woo side about the whole space. And I loved the variety of the different talks and the expertise that was there. And what I really say about this space for me is that it has opened my eye. First of all, the number of people who are dying that don't need to be dying these days, I think that number could go down dramatically if when psychedelic therapies are legalized on a broad scale. And once again, just like with travel, people make judgments about things that they don't know anything about, because there's that knee-jerk reaction. What I am talking about when I talk about the use of psychedelics, I'm talking about a ton of pre-work. In other words, why am I doing this? What's its purpose? What do I hope to get out of it? And that's with a professional. Then it's
Yes.
the actual experience, whatever that might be, psilocybin, ketamine, MDMA, whatever that substance might be. And then it's an intense amount of work after the fact, integration. So when I say psychedelic therapy, I am definitely not talking about, getting some mushrooms from, your buddy and having a chill night listening to music. I mean, I'm not saying that can't be therapeutic for some people. But generally speaking, when someone is new into recovery and they're trying to get their feet under them and stop an unwanted habit, it needs to be done with the help of a professional. And
Yes.
so that has really, really changed my view. And I, am totally, free, I'm careful, but generally free about saying, I've had a few experiences myself now. And the biggest difference is none of the experiences that I've had have led me to like wake up the next day and want to do it again. I mean, first of all, some of them have been very hard,
Yes.
so it's not what people might imagine. I didn't, while there's some pleasantness to the experience, if it's deep therapy, very often it's going to be fairly difficult. But I think the progress I've made in my own recovery from the traumas that have happened to me in my life has been exponentially deeper and, quite frankly, faster. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like the very first big experience I had, I did 5 years of therapy in 6 hours, and I mean, I really mean that. Like, that's not hyperbole. That is specifically how I feel, and the proof is in the people around me. My wife, my children who are grown, they're adults. Um, the big, my favorite saying in AA all those years is attraction rather than promotion. And I believe that holds true in all things. You don't have any experience out there in the world and spend your time just talking about it nonstop to other people, because that's not how if you have genuinely changed and you feel different and seem like, people will notice that. You just have to be open to letting them see it. That's attraction. Promotion is turning it around and saying, oh my God, you have to try this, you have to do this, you got to do, like, I stay away from that. I am only talking about me and my experience. If somebody has a specific question and they want to reach out to me and ask it, I'm all ears, and I'll share anything I have to share. But okay,
Yeah,
jump
that
in there.
shows that shows maturity and respect for it, because I think when somebody maybe first has one of those experiences, their first reaction is, "Oh my God, I got to tell everybody in the world I got to do
Hmm.
this." But
But AA
if you
was the
want, if
same
you,
way, right? I mean, AA was the same way.
yeah,
You first get sober and they call it a pink cloud in AA, and like you want to go out and pull your friends out of the bar and tell them to get sober too. Like, you found this new amazing thing, and they're like, piss off. I don't,
yeah,
they will come to your way of seeing it if they observe you over a period of time and they see you better and as a different person.
absolutely, yeah. I mean, but then you got to reel it in, right? You got to be responsible, and you got to know that, like, when somebody needs that, they'll come to you and ask, and that's what you should do, is provide the information and the support when they come to you. And I thought that you probably took notice to this at the conference. There were quite a bit of talks that were given by people in the medical community with evidence supporting specifically to the reduction of alcohol in very convincing ways. Like, for example, there was one study, don't quote me on the percentages, but I think I'm pretty close, is that they gave 2 doses 6 weeks apart for people that had alcohol use disorder. And they reported around, I think it was 54% of their days were spent heavy drinking days.
Hmm.
And after the 6 months, or after the 6 weeks, they started tracking them for 6 months, and that reduced to, I believe it was 14%
Yeah.
days heavy drinking. So quite a significant, reduction. And that goes across multiple medicines. So, I mean, there's a lot of studies that are coming out with very promising data that shows that this stuff does work for not only that, but just, mental health in general. So, I mean, I think, what do you think about that? You feel pretty
Yeah.
strongly that those are going in the
Dude.
right direction?
Well, look at veterans groups, and there was a study out of Harvard recently that was a very, very controlled, double-blind type of study where they did basically they studied antidepressants, so your more traditional SSRIs, as they're called, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, so SSRIs and therapy versus 2 doses of psilocybin, 7 to 10 days apart, fairly high dose, obviously under the care of a therapist. Um, so those 2 doses and therapy. So you got SSRIs and therapy, psilocybin and therapy. And the psilocybin and therapy was 70%, 70% more effective over the course of a year than the SSRIs and therapy. And if you've ever taken an SSRI, which I have, you have all kinds of other side effects. You're flattened out, you have sexual dysfunction, you got all kinds of negative. Yes, maybe you don't want to kill yourself every day, and certainly there's some benefits to it. And I'm not saying, that that's not an alternative, at least in the short term. But what would you rather do? you know, these 2 doses of psilocybin and then have to take nothing for 6 months to a year, or have to take an SSRI every single day, for the year. In the veterans groups I work with, and I try not to be overly provocative, but sometimes I just can't help myself. And someone will challenge me once in a while. It's like, oh, well, that's a slippery slope right there. You got these people struggling with alcohol or whatever, and now you're going to give them drugs. I'm like, look, man, if you don't know anything about suicide in veterans, you should do some research. And I'm pretty sure, that a couple doses of psilocybin is better than sticking a gun in your mouth and pulling the trigger. And so if I can be a help to intervene in what's going on in a veteran's life, where they're taking their lives every single day at an astounding rate, then I'm going to advocate for that no matter what anybody else says. And nobody ever died of a psilocybin overdose. I mean, it's ignorance and fear. It's big pharma and lobbyists. And I'm not a conspiracy theory guy in general, but almost always in any of these things, all you have to do is ask yourself, or whatever, ask out loud, who benefits from keeping things status quo?
Yeah.
and you can pretty much point to 3 or 4 players that are benefiting greatly from the way things are. Criminal justice, prisons, jails, hospitals, big pharma, like they all benefit incredibly by things staying exactly the way they are. It's an open blank checkbook, and it's a never ending money pipeline to them. And so if other methodologies of getting better, and getting healthier, and getting well and getting sober, if those things become the prevailing methodology, it's going to cost them a lot of money. And, I make no bones about it. That's the nature of the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a difference between ongoing treatment or masking of symptoms versus, getting to a cure or solution. And, like that hits home, especially with the veterans, because my father was a Vietnam veteran who saw a lot of action. And so I
Mm-hmm.
grew up in a home where PTSD greatly affected the house. And I think back and I wonder, if these treatments were available to him, how different his life would have been, as far as like the happiness factor, and how that um trickles down in generationally, and that's actually how you can change the world, is one generation at a time that then spreads out across their children, their children's children, and so on. And that's why I actually do feel that these medicines can change the world in that way. And this is a probably a unfair question to you, but so you have these things like psilocybin that are helping people in multitude of ways, in different stages of where they are in that journey, whether they're just kind of starting on some difficulties or they're deep down into it. And with the around the alcohol, with the mindfulness, having things like Sunnyside where potentially alcohol has not become a problem for you, but you want to change your relationship with it, whether it be for health, whether it be for performance and clarity. Maybe you want to sleep better. There's a lot of different reasons, or it just doesn't feel right to you, but you don't have a straightforward solution in the past, potentially, because it was pretty much AA, and not to pick on AA, but it just, that was the go-to. Now
Yeah.
there's a lot of solutions in different spectrums because people might be just starting with their drinking and they want to get a hold of it early. Do you think in your life things could have looked a little different had you had more resources at that time?
I mean, there's no doubt about it. Now, I'm going to dive deep into philosophy here in just a second because you have to excuse me, but I am also I look at the universe and I look at my own life these days, and I am fully um, believing in the simple idea that my path was my path and the universe has led me to this place. And I had to have all of these hard experiences in order to be the person that I am, hopefully be useful not only to myself and my family, but to other people out there. And had I gotten maybe a quote unquote easier or more effective solution earlier in my life, that may have sent me down a different path, and maybe that would have been the right one. But what I don't do is spend a whole lot of time wondering what could have been. And I spend tons of time being grateful for the fact that I get to be here now. As a younger person, if I'd had a lot of this information, I may have been too self-conscious to actually convey it openly to other people. And I'm still a young person, but I am 61. I'm young 61, and I could absolutely give a shit if somebody has a problem with, me or what I'm saying. I mean, I'm always open to a debate or a discussion or, that type of open dialogue. But in general, I really do mean it when I say, just like being open about my own therapies that I've used in the last couple of years. I know I'm going to get the occasional note from somebody telling me, "Oh, well, you're not sober anymore. If you've done psilocybin, you're not sober anymore." And I'm like, "Well, F you, honestly, because I actually don't care what you say. And I know the difference. I know what sobriety is, and I'm more sober today even than I was during my early years of not drinking." Like those are very different things. And
Yes.
and so it's and what I'll tell you the truth, I've even gotten to a place in recent years that I am certainly, I'm not embarrassed, that would be a silly way to put it, but about the number of years I've been sober. Because but most people can't relate to 31 years sober, right? Most people don't, for whatever reason. I don't know, I'm sure there's tons of us out there, but that's a big number. So somebody new in sobriety, I actually think it's not helpful for them to hear that number because it sounds so impossible. So I
Mm.
really do. I hate to be like too cliche here, but I really do focus on the one day at a time. Like, we have the same amount of sobriety today, right? And like when people get a year or 2 years or 5 years and then they relapse and the AA model takes them back to zero as if they are truly starting over, I think that is deeply damaging
Yes.
to that person. And, it's humiliating. It's, okay, yeah. If you've been sober for 5 years and you had 1 week of that time that you drank, and now all of a sudden you're at zero again, it just, I think a lot of people end up not getting sober again, or their lives end up falling apart and they go back down this really terrible path because of the shame associated with having relapsed. So I don't know what good that does anybody.
I 100% agree with that because there are a few things to that point. Number one, science sort of says that if in AA we'll call it addiction, in other things that you're doing we'll call it habit change. But if you've sustained long habit change over a period of time and have one or two slips ups, they say that that doesn't affect your path to actually forming the new habit and sustaining the new habit.
Mm-hmm.
So, taking that hard line on having to start back at zero like nothing has been done, I do think it can be damaging. And in the term of, we're getting ready to do dry January, depending on whenever somebody listens to this, but they call it dry-ish January because the goal is to get is stick to a schedule that you set out to do. So it might be to make it all 30 days, but let's say you only make it a week and something happens, you're at a party and you get stressed out and decide to have a drink. Well, I think typically on a New Year's resolution thing, well, I already screwed it up. So let's just throw that out the window and go off to the races. But
Mm-hmm.
if you give yourself that grace to say, no, I haven't erased what I've done. I already have a week down. I've got 3 weeks to go. I'll give myself grace today and start back tomorrow. And, you know, eh, I think that puts you on a path to positivity versus a potential setback.
Yeah. I agree with all that you just said. I will say that for me, when I finally got sober at 29, I'd been to rehab when I was 25, and it had been this long progression of me reaching a point where I finally just decided I can't do this anymore. And that's going to be a different path for everybody. And I do believe that, it's funny. Somebody asked me recently if couldn't I just have, and I've gotten this question a lot in my life, but like, couldn't you just have one beer or one glass of wine, like with dinner? And I'm like, yeah, I probably could. I mean, almost certainly, in fact, especially being put on the spot. Like if it was a big dinner and I drank a glass of wine, which I haven't for 31 years, but if I did, I'd probably be fine. I could probably do that again the next night. I might be able to do that every single night for a year. But what I do know for me is I absolutely would have that second glass eventually. And then
Hmm.
I would have the third. So for me, what I know for sure is that it would lead me to a place where I would eventually want more, and that would probably lead me to potentially reconsidering my relationship with drugs like cocaine,
Hmm.
which
Yeah.
isn't, I don't see a value in that for anyone, particularly. So while I certainly I agree with you in theory on everything that you said, but what I really get at for people is that, because you said you said several very important things, but one really stood out to me. Although now I've already forgotten the word that you used. But like, let's say you go to a party New Year's Eve and did you say you're uncomfortable? And if you're
You're
uncomfortable
stressed
or
out or
stressed
yeah.
out, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So, that's the criteria then, in a way, for the way we're framing this. What is the source of that stress? Is it because you're at a party with other people who are drinking and they look like they're having a much better time than you are having? There's layers
Yeah.
here. There's complexities in what is causing the stress. And I do think that a lot of that can be, on the flip side of it, having the sort of experiment of going to a party, like a New Year's Eve party, not drinking, drinking a mocktail, maybe doing some breath work before you go. I tell people all the time too, like, drive your own car since you're not drinking. Drive your car so that you can leave whenever you want. Because I'll be honest with you, the one thing that I'm least likely to do in my life these days is hang around a bunch of drunk people, because it's so not interesting to me. And I think back about, oh my God, was I that guy? And I know that not only was that guy, I was probably way worse than that guy. And like, the worst place to ever be is a sober person around a bunch of people who are really drunk. People just having a cocktail, which is what most of life is. I go to tons of parties. I go to lots of events, and alcohol is always part of those. pretty much. So I don't have any problem with it, but being around it. So I don't know if I just talked in a big circle, but I guess the point is, like everything else, it does have to come down to being an individual decision. And if you're not dealing with a professional or a mentor or someone who can offer some guidance, and it's all just this twisty turny stuff going on in your own brain and you're your own counselor, that's not a good place to be.
Yeah.
Like, this is therapy right here. Like, you and I having this conversation, saying these things out loud, put them in the light of day, and there is no, like, it when you see it. Like, if you decide to have a glass of wine tonight and you haven't had one for a while, you sort of know as you're having it or after whether or not, like, it's feeding the part of you that you want to feed. And it
Yes.
might be, it might be, but I will say that it all, in my view, it does all come down to community. What I recognized in myself, back to Gabor Mate, is that when I was a child, I was an only child. My mom was 18. I grew up in a very adult world, and I was a very lonely child. So it's actually not surprising that when I got old enough to drink, I found huge comfort in alcohol. Like, it was like being wrapped in a warm blanket, and I felt like I wasn't different and I wasn't lonely, and and I know for sure that that's why I went down that path.
Yeah.
And I'm not a lonely person these days. I mean, I'm lonely sometimes, we all are, but I'm, in general, I don't have that issue. So does that mean that I could actually drink like a normal person? Maybe. But I don't have any, like, for me at this point in my life, I don't have any desire to do that, you
Yeah.
know?
When you said that, can you have a drink? And for you, I just thought, why?
Yeah, right.
What would be the benefit to you
Yeah.
at this point?
Yeah.
Whereas, like, maybe somebody that is drinking 3 glasses of wine 3 times a week and says, I want to reduce to two,
Mhm.
I still enjoy it. It still gives me a little bit of good feeling when I just drink two or one.
Mhm.
And for that person, there might be benefit to keep it because it
Mhm.
makes they just enjoy the taste, and they enjoy maybe gathering around it, or whatever the personal reason. There might be some benefit there without the downside on the other side, other than they just want to do a little bit better.
Yeah.
And so I think you agree in that it's highly personalized.
Yeah.
And
Well,
there's
and look, make no mistake, Mike, alcohol saved my life when I was drinking. I I was lonely and in a lot of pain. And if it were not for drinking, I might have killed myself. I might have, like, I mean, I acknowledge that alcohol kind of does what it's supposed to do for a person during a time when they can't find another path to having some relief, whatever
Mhm.
that might look like in their life. For some of us, though, it then crosses that line where it's no longer relief and it actually becomes the source of the stress in and of itself. You're no
Yeah.
longer relieving the stress, it is the stressful thing. And when that happens, we have to examine how we can make a change. And look, I work with Ashley Addiction Treatment Center up in Maryland, and I think that they are the best alcohol addiction treatment center in the country. And it is a primarily abstinence based 12-step treatment center, sort of a traditional rehab, although a really, really good one. But what I love about them, and the reason that I work with them, is that they are open to every idea. You know what I mean? Like, they're open to any kind of therapy if science says that it's going to work. I mean, because you got Johns Hopkins and Harvard and a lot of amazing academic facilities that are doing great research. You've got MAPS, which you're aware of course, doing tons of research. And, so to me, the best treatment centers and therapy centers like Ashley are open to seeing where this can go. But the point of it is, it's also medication assisted. So if it's whatever that, so it can be medication assisted. I guess that's the point. So if there needs to be medication accompanying your letting go of this bad habit that you want to get rid of, then that's part of it. And the best part of it is that it's, you know, HIPAA compliant, it's insurance covered, and, you know, so people can actually, you know, get help. You and I both know the stats. You know, there's 4 million people that actually go to rehab every year in the US, but there's 40 million people that actually need help of some kind. So, and then of the 4 million that actually get help, you know, unfortunately, a large percentage of them they aren't successful in that. You know, it takes repeat visits or rehabs or whatever. I mean, the system is just, it needs to keep improving and not just stay in that static place where it's been for so many years. And places like Ashley, they've got their eyes open, man. It's nonprofit. Doesn't mean they don't need to make money, because it's a very expensive industry, but it's, you know, their focus is on, if there's another idea out there that can help their patients get better, then they're going to listen, and they're going to try to see if they can do some research on it themselves. And I think that's the mindset that we all need to have going forward.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the way I look at it is the more viable solutions that are out there that can serve people depending on where they are. They might be early onto a path that's going to turn bad, and there's solutions early on that would relate to them. They haven't, it hasn't become problematic, but it might be. There are people that are just wanting to reduce. There should be solutions for that also. There
Yeah.
are people that don't identify with the traditional roots, and there should be solutions for them. Whether or not it's a program, whether it's just a group, whether it's a book, whether it's an app, I think that it's just such a complex problem, or just a complex issue, that the more good information and solutions out there, the healthier the population will be.
Yeah. Well, and we've never, look, man, we all know this, but I mean, we've never been more disconnected while being unbelievably connected, right? So we're technologically connected with each other, yet, you know, in person and in a loving, kind way, we are, you know, less connected than ever. And I think that that's going to continue to inform these numbers that we're talking about. You know, alcoholism and deaths from alcohol have, you know, if we were really so much, all we hear about is fentanyl and it's a terrible problem and everything else. But I mean, we're still talking about a tiny fraction of people dying from that every year as compared to alcohol consumption. So I also don't want to not acknowledge the sheer, I don't even know what the number is now, but the number that sticks in my head is something like 500,000 Americans die every year as a direct result of, you know, of over consuming alcohol.
Hmm.
And that can be, obviously, that can take all kinds of forms, and the number is probably, you know, higher. But I think that you know, the real issue is loneliness and disconnectedness and hopelessness, you know. And you know, my hope is that in particular, you know, your demographic, your age and younger, will try to find ways to build community even in the face of even more technology. And it's a hard, you know, it's a hard balance to really, you know, to really find. But I'll come back to sort of the beginning of the conversation. To me, travel, nature, you don't have to go do crazy adventures, maybe like I've done, but, you know, if you're not getting out with other people that you care for and going for a hike on the weekends, or, you know, getting out in nature and breathing fresh air, and those are the greatest healing methodologies that exist today, that have always existed for us.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing more natural than nature. And even if you're not an outdoors person, it's hard to not feel good when you get out
Yeah.
and just spend some time.
Yeah, everybody's an outdoor person. I always ask audiences, or I tend to ask them, okay, who here, let's get one thing out of the way. Who hates running? Like half the audience will raise their, 2/3 of the audience, even running groups, half the people will raise their hands. And I'm like, oh, so you hate fresh air and you hate birds and you hate, and I remind people that it's not running they hate, it's the discomfort associated with running that they dislike. And that
Mm.
may sound like splitting hairs, but I tell people all the time, like, okay, go for a walk. I mean, I've still got a therapist these days, and I always will have somebody that I trust that I want to talk to from time to time. And one of the deals I have with my therapist is we schedule it where she and I are both going for a walk. We're not together, rarely, but even in our own location, I'll head out the door, she'll head out the door, and we'll have our hour-long conversation while we're walking, while we're moving our bodies. And like the brain works better, the body feels better, like, everything about that process is just more open, I believe. And so, in this coming year, I would certainly continue to advocate for what I've always advocated for. Be gentle with yourself, but stick to the commitment, especially if exercise and being outdoors is part of your commitment. That is the best way. It's the best way to gain perspective on the habits that may not be serving you anymore. It's the best way to keep your body and your mind healthy. It's the best way to deal with stress. It's a it's a fix all. I do a lot of work in the longevity world, and some of the folks I work with, offer very expensive and effective methodologies, stem cells, other things like that. And they're absolutely amazing. But I always tell people, look, if you're not, let me save you some money. If you're not going for a walk at least 5 days a week, just for 30 minutes a day, like that will add 10 years to your life. So if you want longevity, just do that one simple thing, and that will dramatically increase your lifespan, your health span, reduce your biological age. It'll do all the things you want. And then if you want to do that, and you've got the money to be able to get some other really wonderful treatments, then by all means do that. But you know, it's we're all on this journey together of exploration, and I think part of it is not being too hard on yourself. We all fall short at times, and in the alcohol space, it's not just one path towards a healthier, better life.
Oh, I love that. And I do think, as somebody that does it myself, being too hard on yourself and giving yourself grace is really important. And I think that this is a really good point to end on a high note, because it's a perfect fast forward culmination of all the things that we kind of went through, and where you were and where you are now. You're getting ready to go on, or prepping at least to go on, this big adventure. Why
Yeah,
don't you share that before we close out? Because
yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's incredible.
Thank you. Well, and it's been a long time in the making, and I've had to be patient. I was very close the first year of COVID to having all the funding for this project and everything in place. And of course, you know, my plans, along with the plans of almost everybody else on the planet, pretty much went out the window for a couple of years. But, in essence, I like to say that my journey, like your journey and most everyone listening to this, has been this never-ending cycle of low places and high points. When I teach my kids, I mean, and again, my kids are grown now, but like they've heard me say this for their entire lives. And that is, never make a big decision at a low moment or at a high moment, because that moment's going to pass, and don't, so like at a low moment, don't quit your job or leave your marriage or your relapse or whatever it might be. You may still choose to do that thing the next day or the next week or whatever, but typically if we can just get past that minute get a good night's sleep, wake up the next day, we're going to have a little bit different perspective. It might ultimately lead to the same path. Flip side of that is, you get the promotion or you get some bonus or whatever, don't go buy the fancy car or the don't also go, because that also, those are short-lived experiences. So why that relates to this adventure is, I recognize that I could put a physical, literal spin on this idea of low places and high points. And to do that, I'm going to go at the beginning of 2025, so a little over a year from now. The plan is to go from the lowest place on the planet to the highest. So from the Dead Sea. Now, I'll also say my original plan was to go from the Dead Sea in Israel, and just like always, life doesn't always allow for the things specifically that we want. My hope is that this terrible conflict that's taking place will be resolved in some way, but who knows what's going to happen, so I allow for the fact that I may not start in Israel. I may start in Jordan or somewhere else, but I'm going to go from the lowest place, which is the Dead Sea. I'm going to cross the Arabian Desert on foot, primarily running, doing some walking and hiking too. But I'm going to go all the way to the tip of Oman. And in Oman, I'm going to actually row about 1,000 miles across the Indian Ocean in a solo rowing vessel. That'll take a few weeks, and then I'm gonna get to India, and I'm gonna get on a mountain bike and actually bike all the way across India, which is about 2,000 miles. And I have a plan to get together with the Dalai Lama in India and some other cool experiences that have taken a while to put together. And I'm going to make my way all the way to Western Nepal and then to the base camp at Everest. And as I like to say, from there, it's only like 2 or 3 miles, it just happens to be straight up. So it will take me from the lowest place on the planet to the highest. And it's probably close to 5,000 miles when all is said and done, total. And, it's a symbolic thing more than anything else. It is the journey of the way we all operate. And as I like to say, Everest is a good metaphor for life, because most people who die on Everest, and this is sort of a morbid way to put this, so apologies at the end of our time, but most people who die on Everest die on the way down. And I think that a lot of people don't make it to the top, but the majority of people who do not survive the experience actually make it to the top and die on the way down. And so it's part of the metaphor here is don't die on the way down. There's always another opportunity. I work with so many young people who struggle with alcohol and drug addiction, and I always tell them don't die on the way down, and it's just sort of a symbolic idea of recognizing that the struggle is going to continue. Life is struggle. I mean, life is joy and happiness, but there's no time in my life, I knew this a long time ago, where all my problems are going to be resolved, and like then I can be happy, or then I can be joyful. The flip side is the truth, which is joy and happiness are mine to have anytime I want them, anytime, no matter what. My wife's in the other room. We're over 6 years into a very hard battle with cancer for her, trying to save her life every single day. And, it's still our choice to be happy and joyful, even in the face of hardship. And I think that's it's a great way to wrap this up, is this idea of, choice and of, self-administration. It's other people do not have the ability to make us unhappy. Only we can do that.
Yes. Oh, man. So beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Charlie, this has just been just incredible. I mean, from a personal point of view, I mean, I took so much from this. So thank you for spending the time with us.
My pleasure. Well, and thanks for, I love having a conversation and not just checking the boxes of, what I've done in my life or whatever, what we've done. And, for people who want to know more, obviously my website is an easy place to see more, but it is my my email and my phone number that's on my website. So for someone who really wants to have a chat with me, as you well know, I'm I'm pretty accessible and I try to respond. And some people don't want to do it in a public forum, but I'm always open to having a chat. So, and I wish you the best for the future. And you got my number, so let's keep in touch, man.
Yeah, I love it. We'll make sure to link everything up in the description here. And yeah, I mean, I've just been so appreciative that you were open and willing to be communicative and also to come on the show. So thanks,
Yeah.
Charlie.
It was my pleasure, Mike. And you have a great holiday season. I'll talk to you soon.
This podcast is brought to you by Sunnyside, the #1 alcohol moderation platform, having helped hundreds of thousands of people cut out more than 13 million drinks since 2020. And in fact, an independent study showed that Sunnyside reduced alcohol consumption by an average of 30% in 90 days. And as one of our members shared, Sunnyside helps me stay mindful of my drinking habits. It's not super restrictive, so if I'm craving a glass of wine with dinner, I just track it and I move on with my week. If you could benefit from drinking a bit less and being more mindful of when and how much you drink, head on over to sunnyside.co to get a free 15-day trial. You'll get access to everything that we offer, including tracking and planning tools, coaching from our experts, a vibrant community of people just like you, and the motivation and advice to stay on track with your health goals, all with no pressure to quit. That's sunnyside.co.